times when we are talking about climate change right now, people talk about it as something that's going to happen to us. It's something, is this impending doom in the future that's slowly and slowly coming, but that's not really the case, right? The climate crisis has been happening, it is happening, and it's going to continue to impact life on Earth. So how are we making sure that our solutions are going to embody and carry everybody that lives on this planet, including animals, different communities, different areas impacted by different systems of oppression and structures in place? So how are we going to get to the roots of climate change? So when I was 15, I co-founded a youth climate organization with 3 other folks I met online. We organized the first International Youth Climate March which the main march was here in DC, or there in DC, and then in 25 other cities across the world. We did a lot of advocacy work, art builds, and a lot of climate justice work. And this presentation is a part of the climate justice education campaigns that we had going on in talks about different systems of oppression and that intersection with the climate crisis. This was a photo from our first march in July of 2018, and this kind of catapulted, or was one of the first actions of the mainstream kind of like youth climate movement that we saw in 2019, the following year, with the strikes movement across the world. So these are some of the guiding principles of the organization. As a movement, we believe those who are on the front lines of any movement should lead that movement. Youth leadership is transformational and visionary. Youth must lead because they've always shifted culture towards progress and collective liberation. In this movement, we will be peaceful and nonviolent. We will extend the hand of friendship. We will demand that our allies take action in solidarity with us. And then we affirm that climate change is real, indigenous rights must be honored, animals are on the front lines, nature is the most powerful force, each generation must learn from each other, Black Lives Matter, people with disabilities must be included and respected. So just a content advisory warning, there's going to be some heavy topics talked about throughout the presentation. So systems of repression have not only intersected with the climate crisis, but have been the cause of the climate crisis reaching the caliber that it has now. These include colonialism, racism, patriarchy, and capitalism. All of these systems have exploited the land, have exploited people in different ways, and show up in the ways that the climate crisis is impacting people, whether that's through natural disasters, through pollution, affecting Black and brown communities specifically. It has showed up in the ways that people are getting impacted, and we need to recognize these and include them in our solutions moving forward, or include uprooting and dismantling these systems. So colonialism is one of the first ones I want to talk about today. This is an image of Manifest Destiny that we probably all saw in our middle or high school or even elementary history class, this mode of westward expansion. Colonialism is the control over a piece of land by people or dominant power. A lot of colonialism has pushed out indigenous folks from the land that they work with, the land that they have lived upon. Indigenous folks are land protectors, they're water protectors, they're constantly working with the land, and enacting genocides on people that have been working with the land is going to not only exploit people, but exploit the land and the resources that we take from it, right? We're seeing this right now in Palestine with the settler colonialism. They are destroying olive trees, and not only does that destroy a food source, but that destroys a cultural aspect, right? With olive oil and olives as food. That's one example of that. You can see in this graph, a lot of the Western powers are the ones that emit more of the greenhouse gases. You can see the US and parts of Europe compared to countries in South America and Africa. So key war architect and United States National Security Advisor John Bolton said that the Middle East was a critical oil and natural gas producing region, and that the US fought so many wars to try and protect that. So when we think of colonialism, of the US imperialism in the Middle East, that access to oil and those resources and what it's really truly about at the end of the day, and what powers are willing to do to get that oil for money. Racism is the next one we're going to talk about. So environmental racism is a big aspect of different communities getting, a lot of plants are put next to Black and brown communities in neighborhoods, and pollution is more likely to be around those folks in those communities, has more detrimental health effects, especially to people who are young. There's a lot of children with asthma, and This also impacts the prison industrial complex, as a lot of Black and brown folks are wrongly incarcerated or unjustly incarcerated, and these folks have to, a lot of times they engage with really low wage labor that is offered at the prison facilities, and one of these acts of labor is to go out and put wildfires to mitigate natural disasters, and this is a very dangerous form of labor to do, and they're putting their bodies on the line, and for very low wage amount of money, almost seen as like kind of like a modern day slavery in a way. So when we think of capitalism, we think of something that's super extractive, right? It's a system where we're constantly taking and taking and taking. We're exploiting the land, exploiting people, exploiting animals for money, for profit, and for greed. And then patriarchy shows up in the ways that we recognize ourselves in our bodies, right? And a lot of times when I think about patriarchy in the sense of systems of oppression, it's a lot of gender, like man, woman, but also just in the ways that our body shows up, like folks that are disabled, Black and brown folks, the power and dominance that certain bodies have over other bodies. A lot of women globally are affected in natural disasters, are the ones that often stay behind or get left behind, and also have a lack of access to like menstrual resources, to childcare resources, and that's another thing that we're seeing in Palestine right now as well. Industrial animal agriculture ties back to capitalistic processes. We're constantly taking and taking, we're pushing and we're pushing. These systems have exacerbated the conditions of these animals, pushed their bodies to a certain amount. It's impacted the land and where they deforest to put these factory farms up, and there's a lot of waste produced from these factories that gets put back into the environment. A lot of people are displaced as well for these factory farms, and there's such a disconnect when we think of industrial animal agriculture, right? We go to the store, we buy our meat, and I'm vegetarian, so I have a little bit of a bias, but when it comes to how much the industry is impacting the world and the planet, there's a lot of impact. There's also a lot of greenhouse gas emissions that come out, and so there's this contradiction with local farming and folks that are really engaging with the animals and having relationships with the animal that they're are growing and feeding over time. One of my friends who runs a farm once said that she would rather know the name of the animal that she's eating, to have that connection with that animal. And so just thinking of the ways also how inhumane it is that all these animals have suffered such like terrible lives throughout their whole lives, right? Not only just that aspect of death. Climate change also impacts disabled folks. A lot of disabled folks are left behind in natural disasters and are often kind of left behind in the thinking and the conversations that we have. Just making sure, and also thinking of like our older folks who aren't able to fully take care of themselves sometimes. So there's a lot of structural changes and personal changes that we can take. Structural changes include having more climate justice education that is unified across the country and across the world, local and community farming, sustainable autonomous housing, and having more public transit. A just transition is also needed, and a just transition would make sure that the folks that are working in fossil fuel industries and mining industries are being trained to work in green, clean energy systems, so they're not being left behind in the moving past fossil fuels. And also recognizing the systems of oppression and making sure that we're dismantling. There's a lot of people in recent years have been going more towards green capitalism, greenwashing, and that is still rooted in capitalism, looking to get money as a source of power rather than finding solutions that work with the land and are reducing greenhouse gas emissions. These are some things we can do. There's a Zero Hours People's platform that has more resources on this. School boards can pass climate resolutions and have different acts to make their schools run on clean energy. You can divest money from banks and go to credit unions, reduce meat consumption, and do support businesses that have strong sustainability plans. So, thinking about all this, I constantly am asking myself, how can we center resiliency in our solutions to keep our community safe while also continuing to fight for a world with climate justice for all? We've gotten to a point where oftentimes we are looking at natural disasters through our phones, right? Every few months there's a really major disaster, and we text our friends and check up on our friends that live in those cities. This is a photo from Asheville after their hurricane and the flooding that happened there last year. We're constantly kind of living through it on our screens before it happens to us, in a way. So how are we making sure that when these disasters do happen, as they're increasing more and more, that we are keeping each other safe and protecting each other while also still fighting for that world that we believe in? This is a excerpt from Public Power in the Age of Empire by Nadia Nazar. It's a book that I was taking into consideration a lot when making work for the show. She says, this is the first paragraph of the book: "When language has been butchered and bled of meaning, how do we understand public power? When freedom means occupation, and democracy means neoliberal capitalism, when reform means repression, when words like empowerment and peacekeeping make your blood run cold, why then public power could mean whatever you want it to mean? A biceps building machine or a community power shower. So I'll just have to define public power as I go along in my own self-serving sort of way." And she goes into define public power in the rest of the book. The book is in our book collection over there if anyone wants to take a look with my annotations and all. But her meaning of community, of building people power, how can we link arms and hold each other at this time, especially right now with the current administration, harming people individually, harming communities as a whole. How can we make sure that we're fighting back and holding our own? A protest in DC for Palestine. Another excerpt, she says, "Radical change cannot and will not be negotiated by any governments, can only be enforced by people, by the public, a public who can link hands across national borders." I often think of community when organizing and the ways that friendship has fostered sustainable community organizing. A lot of times we see marches that are kind of one-off, we go to one, but then what do we do afterwards? You know, how do we stay in touch with the movements? How do we connect with each other and build that power and that momentum? When I worked with 0 Hour, that was a really big aspect for me. When I first started organizing, it was all online. We were all doing Zoom calls and slowly becoming friends, but it was all still very distant, right, because of Zoom connections. But after that 1 year when we organized in person, it rained on the day of the march, and we all had gotten so close just being together. And after that point, it made me want to organize not only for what I was passionate about, but for these people, you know, that to understand that I am surrounded by community with love and friendship, and that so many people in this world have that, and that's what we need to fight for, to protect this and to still keep joy in our lives. I always say that this is one of the most honest photos of myself. It's me at the September 20th, 2019 strike in DC. I was one of the lead organizers, and whenever there would be a march, I'd always be like, no one can talk to me, everyone has to, not no one can talk to me, but I was like, this needs to go there, this needs to go there. And I would call it like organizer brain, getting kind of in those moments where there's so much going on, and having to kind of be able to read the room and understand everyone's needs in a way, and to make sure things go smoothly. This was the first art build I organized. We painted a banner. We were in a mass extinction. 2 of the people that came to this art build then were helping me lead the DC strikes the next year, and it was the first time I had met them, and that made me really think about art and music as a way to bring people together. They were kind of folks who hadn't organized before, were newly kind of just like interested in getting involved, and a few months later they were helping me call the shots and organize together. This was a puppet made for the September 20th climate strike. That's a fossil fuel CD. So a few years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, someone asked me if I was a sculptor, and I got really offended. I got almost defensive in a way. I was kind of like, why would you think that? Like, what do you mean? And a few months after I got that comment, I took my first formal sculpture class in undergrad, and fell in love with metalworking and with steel. Started my relationship with steel around then. And now I can't think of myself as anything else. And in some ways, I think to be a sculptor is to be an organizer, and that those things go so hand in hand. The act of making things, the act of doing, of bringing people together, bringing things together. To be a sculptor is to be an organizer, and to be an organizer is to be one rooted in action and empathy. This is the last page of the book. She says, it's time to recognize that no amount of nuclear weapons or full spectrum dominance or daisy cutters or spurious governing councils and lawyer jargons can buy peace at the cost of justice. The urge for hegemony and preponderance by some will be matched with greater intensity by the longing for dignity and justice by others. Exactly what form that battle takes, whether it's beautiful or bloodthirsty, depends on us. This was a quote that I was thinking about a lot when doing the metal fabrication for the show in over the winter, and it's a excerpt from Jonas Mekas' "As I was moving ahead, occasionally I saw brief glimpses of beauty." It says, "Know the voice said, you should stay here and continue doing what you were doing and work it. Should I retreat into some silent place and work it out all by myself, I asked. Stay here and continue doing what you were doing and work it out the difficult way. The easy way will save your soul only. The difficult way will save your soul and a few others. So this is your choice, salvation by yourself or salvation together with others." So as we move forward in our ever-changing world impacted by the climate crisis and fascism and all the things happening around us, it's important to stay together, to work on things together, and to keep laughing with each other and loving your friends and staying in community and doing it the difficult way. And yeah. That is my talk. You can find some more information about Zero Hour on This Is Zero Hour on social media, and the website is thisiszerohour.org. There's an email there as well. And I just wanted to leave it at this, but I can take any